Welcome to this week's edition of Trev Talks. We are joined today by a very special guest. We have Stewart Muir with us in the studio. So if you are listening to us live on Moose FM, or if you're following up later online, Stewart is a very large list of attributes to your name. You're a very sought-after speaker. You are a award-winning or top-winning published author of quite a few topics from what I see.
That's right. I've spent my life in media and journalism, communications, above all storytelling.
Yeah, which is what it is all about.
It
right?
is.
And you are the founder of ResourceWorks, the
Yes.
founder and chairman of ResourceWorks. So welcome to the show, Stewart. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Trevor.
You know, lately, and the reason I guess we reached out to you, you were in Fort St. John, which was perfect. You know, Adam kind of shot me off a message last night and said, hey, change things around. You know, I just seen that Stewart's in town and we need to get him onto the show. So I appreciate you making time for us. I know you've got probably a very busy day today. A lot is happening right now, and it was funny. What really, you know, got me yesterday was one of your retweets or one of your responses to Susan Sarandon. So for those of you that maybe aren't on Twitter, didn't follow it, Susan Sarandon made a comment about you know, the reasons why you know, all of this should be happening and what should be shut down and as far as the pipeline goes and as far as resource works in the province of British Columbia goes and you had a very good response because you basically rolled it back out saying, you know, here's this $50 billion actress that has zero ties to Canada other than
That's right.
her own benefit and the fact that, you know, she's taking this stance that nobody should be rewarded or be able to make a better life by projects like this.
Yeah, here's someone who owns a probably $3 million penthouse in Greenwich Village in New York City. She has a vast fortune that she's earned through her talents over many years in acting. And she's basically taken some talking points sent by one of these groups that is funded and created for the purpose of preventing Canada from providing for its people. And she just simply repeated that to her followers who have no way to process or filter or analyze this information. Oh, Susan Sarandon, it says it must be true. And I think it's shameful that someone would do that when you, as most listeners, I think, have an understanding of what real life is like for First Nations in this country, especially rural, everywhere really. And it's so tough. Everyone has work to do on this to denigrate those efforts as Susan Sarandon does. I personally am offended by that, and I think everyone else should be too.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think your response was epic. I think the way you captured the true matter of what was actually being said, I think was phenomenal. Because again, like you said, right, there's her list of followers that are then championing her on. Yep. You know, cheering her on, and we turn around and we look at the Canadian side of it, we look at the local side of it, where people are saying, you know what, mind your own business. Like, you know,
Yep.
this doesn't involve you. And it's funny because I've had lots of people on the show, and one of the main themes we always get back to when we start to talk politics, we start to talk industry and resources, is the fact that Canada seems to have vastly, and BC has dropped out of the running for, you know, a very large, impactful resource development country or province. Yeah. And we've seen the United States, you know, rise above us for the first time. I don't know what it was maybe in December. You know, they were a net exporter of natural resources.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and here we are in Canada under a very stringent and maybe not fair provincial and federal government that is holding us back from that spot that we once owned.
Yeah, it's a big bad world out there. 2 days ago, I heard the news that the Saudis, their oil company Aramco, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, is actually buying LNG projects in the United States that may well use Canadian gas to, you know, monetize to a higher level the value of our gas owned by the Saudis now, that will be sold to the places that need it now, that we're trying to get it to in Asia, that are trying to deal with their GHG, their emissions challenges by having our gas. Imagine the ironies of that. They're Saudi Arabian. We know what their human rights record is. We know what their environmental practices are, in both cases deficient, and we can do so much better. We are doing so much better. Where I am in the piece, I'm very well aware of what people here do every day to protect the environment and make Canada better. It's one of the great unsung stories of Canada right now. And actually one of my reasons for being here is to try to share that with more people, because it is so very important. If the Saudis are going to take the gas you're producing and multiply its value and put the money in their pockets, how good do you feel about that? Oh, well, not good at all, and you shouldn't. I mean, this is terrible what's happening. And when, we were talking before the show, Trevor, political leadership is a hot topic right now, and I think there's a lot of exploration of that topic that's needed.
I do too, and I think, you know what I think? I think the more conversation that happens, and that's, we focused the show on that a little bit in the last few months, because the more conversation that happens as we come into a federal election, and, you know, Alberta's provincial election still affects us up here. People need to get involved. They need to be aware of what's happening. You know, and it's funny because you mentioned now, again, our natural gas going to a Saudi company. We've got the entire eastern part of Canada with no access to Alberta oil, you know, coming from Saudi Arabia and these other countries that they shouldn't be. We're Canada. We are known for our resources. We are proud, we are safe, and we do it right. And there's no reason that our country shouldn't benefit first, and then other countries can benefit from what we do so well.
Yeah, truly well put. And you know, I think what's happening in the news, we have these groups that are trying to shift the focus of what's really important to things that, you know, they have their importance, certainly. I mean, who wouldn't agree that Indigenous reconciliation is at the top of the list?
Definitely.
It's not the only thing on the list, though. It's a long list. Like, where do you put clean water for Indigenous people? Where do you put the ability for rural women just to get a driver's license so that they can go to do the things they need for their families? Right now, that's one of the small, fairly, maybe people here are aware of this, but it's a crippling thing if you don't have that. And I know there's people in the Northwest who are working to change that, because only then can those people even be in line for a job. Just that requirement that a lot of people take for granted. So we've got people from, you know, the Tides Foundation and David Suzuki Group trying to make the news about a supposed conflict about hereditary versus elected. Okay, that's a legitimate thing, but it's not the only thing. No. And I think they've been very successful in pushing the news media's interest onto that, because they've built up over a number of years with a lot of money. You know, this week I exposed on my Twitter account, SJ Muir, the fact that Tides Foundation put over $200,000 into the Office of the Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Government, which has been used to build a camp there. So anyone who thinks from the news reports that this is an organic thing and the hereditary chiefs have, you know, found that this is the only way they can have their grievances aired and they've done this on their own. No, it's all been stage managed from San Francisco and Vancouver.
Wow.
Activists pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into this over years. It's a strategy. Like, when you see people in different cities across Canada take up an issue they've never even heard of, and suddenly there's hundreds or thousands of people on the streets who are screaming as if it's, you know, someone is snatching their baby away. Like, what's going on? It's like a mass psychosis. This is the organizations that have been built through years of steady determination by these groups to fundraise around their messages. I mean, we talk about Trump a lot. People are bothered by the media age, the Facebook, the fake news. Well, what's going on in our country with this environmental activism is also in that same domain, but people don't want to talk about it because it's positioned, it's marketed to us as warm and fuzzy. It's baby harp seals and spirit bearers and poor hereditary chiefs. And I have sympathy for all of those things. I'm a conservationist. I know you are, Trevor. But let's be clear here. It's an attempt to distract us from the important decisions that are all through our governance in public life, and being sort of focused on that one thing for a particular political end. You know, where anyone who believes that that's the real thing that's happening is successfully a victim of that type of campaigning.
Wow. So that was on your Twitter account.
Yep,
So they can,
that's right.
They can check you out on Twitter.
No one had exposed that until I did through my research, and I shared that a couple of days ago. $220,000 specifically for this group, which has, you know, it has no responsibility to provide clean water or roads or sanitation,
any sort of
or anything.
All.
All they do, it seems, and I have the highest respect. I've read the anthropology of this proud people, and I am in awe at their traditions over thousands of years to protect the land, to take one of the world's most special cultures, which is at threat now because they're losing their language. Young people are moving away and not coming back. The language is being lost and culture's lost because of that. And the only way we can see them restore that is for them to have economic opportunities. Yeah. Yet, perversely, that is what people like the Tides Foundation are funding to stop from happening. It's crazy. Absolutely outrageous.
That is crazy. You know, and it's funny you mentioned that because I was the same. You know, it was up until 2 days ago, you know, and I think a lot of the people, and probably a lot of the people up here were the same. And then last night, there's protests being staged all across Canada and into North America and into the United States. And I'm going, what happened, right? Because for us, and myself, I mean, we've had a lot of guests on the show that have been, mayors in the Northwest. They've been VPs for the LNG companies. We've had a wide array of these guys that have shared with us the amount of work they've done working with First Nations and communities and the province as a whole. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere was boom, there's this great big problem that's arising, and I think a majority of people now just kind of have tried to block it out, have tried to walk away from it, but it's getting louder and it's getting louder. And
I want to give people a bit of advice, and this is hard-won advice. I'm not an advice giver. I don't go around bothering my friends with advice for them. They don't need it. But here's one thing I want to share from my experience. There's this effort to make us talk about the issue that people are putting out there, and it's a good issue to talk about, reconciliation and healing. Very important. But let's also make sure that the people who understand the energy issues, the resource issues, are talking about their issues and not being afraid to talk about them, and do so far and wide, and become a thorn in the side of your neighbor and friends. Become an energy bore if you have to, because it's so important that the knowledge you have about responsible natural gas development leading to LNG is shared. Because one of the most important things, even though we have ubiquitous media, everyone's got the world's most powerful media devices in their hands all day long. Does anyone get their Google, that new time report? You spent 8 hours a day. Oh my God! But we're all doing that.
I try to avoid reading that.
Well, we're all media devices, but don't forget that the richest relations that exist are human to human, person to person, one on one. When you're talking to someone, don't get into an argument with them, but ask them what their views are and things, and ask if you can help and share your knowledge. That's really something you don't have to spend any money on. You don't have to go out of your way. You don't have to, reschedule your life to do that. You can do it in your daily life. All you people should do it when you go vacation. Maybe you're going for a sun break and there's some Canadians in the pool from Sarnia and they don't know about this, or from Toronto, they probably don't know about it.
True.
Use that chance to share your information, but respectfully, think before you talk and be informed. But it's your own livelihood and future that is at stake. So do these things.
Agreed. And it's funny because we've got our federal election that's going to be coming up this year. It comes up this fall. Justin Trudeau was in Kamloops yesterday, not very well received. I watched a lot of the meetings he was at, and some really good questions given to him that I don't believe he dealt with properly. And and one of his comments at the end was how unfortunate these arrests were, but that's the process that has to happen. And again, it comes back to, why is it even happening? Why are we even have this happening? And I love the fact that you've uncovered this, and I'm going to check that out. And I think everybody should check that out on your Twitter, so they can get a clear understanding of what's really happening. It's funny because on the show we've joked in the past about fake news and CNN, and every time Trump gets upset and if he doesn't like it, it's fake news. And I think a lot of people again just kind of wish-wash that out, but they need to understand that it's happening right here in Canada. And if we're not careful, it's going to control our political outcomes.
Yeah, we don't need to accept that an interest group is making something the top agenda item. We are under no obligation to accept that, and especially in a case where it's such a wrong approach and such a destructive, disrespectful approach. No obligation. Yet politicians act as if it were their obligation to say, oh yes, this is the problem. Yes, we must talk about this. We must stop any action. We're going to stop building that thing. We're going to slow down our decision making because you've identified the thing we all have to talk about. No, these processes need to occur, just as hundreds of other processes. As you know, anyone in local government is straddling multiple layers of process development and files that are open and things that are happening. I've been talking to people about the caribou strategy. That's a whole show, I think, Trevor, what's happening there.
It is.
It's kind of disturbing how government is following this sort of star chamber approach to managing people's futures. Tourism is at risk. Recreation is at risk. And no one is talking about it. No.
But when they try to talk about it, we had Mike Bernier on the show just before Christmas, and part of that was towards this, because it was the same idea where Mike's going around and he's hitting up Chetwynd and he's hitting up Tumblr and a lot of the areas that are inside of his control, and nobody else is talking about it. We've got the Resource Coalition. Had tried to make a meeting. It was canceled because the province wouldn't partake. We had the regional district try to hold a meeting that the province demanded be in private. And, you know, when the regional district members went back and said, listen, this isn't going to be in private, this is public information that people need to know, the province cancels it. And at what point in time are they going to realize or come to the conclusion that this conversation needs to happen one way or another? Because whatever change they're going to make, it's going to affect all of us.
That's right. Yeah. And when these decisions are made in secret and a baked solution is then pushed out through a consultation process that is not consultation, that is a failure of democracy. We're headed that way in the Caribou Strategy case for sure.
Agreed. But I think, you know, and it's funny, and I don't know if it might have been Bob and I that were talking, Bob Zimmer, our MP, and one of the things I noticed with Horgan ever since he, you know, got into power, took power, however a person's views are, is it's as if somebody will go to him in one of their meetings or one of their backroom meetings and say, you know what, John, I've got this idea and this is what should happen. And if he likes it, boom, it's in the media. You know, and he comes out and he says, this is the latest, greatest thing. And instead of doing his research and finding out who it's going to affect, how it's going to affect, it just immediately becomes this great big rolling ball of bad information and bad processes and horrible ideas. And before you know it, it's too late. And it's as if he feels that he has to complete this just to hold to his word.
Yes, and it becomes something you can't go back on. It's almost as if people who are trapped in some web of who knows what, who are carefully trying to make sure that nothing they say in future compromises anything that's been said in the past, so it is all consistent. And inevitably, things like that do blow up on you. I think it's much better to do it just have the flame of truth on this stuff. Yeah. Be transparent. Be honest. Be a true representative of people who put you in power and not subject to interest groups that are pushing you this way and that. Also, the feds, I think, there's quite a story there, in terms of the
that's
mechanics on this.
You know what I mean? I don't think people realize how much, you know what, I think with Alberta, you know, it came out to Alberta, the feds pushed it onto Alberta. Alberta came back and said, hey, you know what, we're not doing this. You know, you guys do your homework on it, do your work on it. Let us know how that works out.
So two jurisdictions, two totally different outcomes and dynamics. Yeah. Why is one getting a certain treatment and another getting another? It's leadership.
It is, and I agree with you. And you know what? I mean, I try not to ever put down politicians on the show because I always give the topmost respect to anybody who's going to get involved and try to make changes. But you know what? I think this is a prime example of what happens when you've got a province like British Columbia. And I mean, Alberta went through the same thing when they elected Rachel Notley. You've got a province like BC right now that you've got a very new leader. And I mean, Canada's going through the same thing, right? I'm just not ready. You know, where you've got somebody who's been a dedicated MLA and maybe a dedicated community member prior to that. And all of a sudden, you've got this person that's left to control two very different entities inside of one province, right? The North and the South are very, very, very different. And you're trying to broad stroke paint them all with the same brush. And it's not working. And I think, you know, and I think what we see with by-elections that are coming up and all the different issues that come up through government is he's got to at some point realize that that's what the problem is. And yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and I'm just showing you, Trevor, on my phone. I have a picture of this thing. It's Republic of Western Canada, economic juggernaut. This only came to my attention here while I was visiting. I didn't know there was a speaker who's touring the cities and towns of Western Canada who is talking about this Republic of Western Canada. There's a map. It contains Saskatchewan, Alberta, and northern British Columbia. I've heard different distillations of these ideas. I've been around a long time in my career. I've worked in Alberta at the time when separatism, a long time ago, was talked about freely and openly, and it seems to be something people are talking about again. I'm worried because, hey, I'm not interested in a different country. I don't think anybody really is, but it is a factor of the frustration that people are feeling, that they're thinking about options and wanting to talk about them. Maybe it's a bit of self-therapy or something, but there's something worrisome when we have a situation where this is actually happening. It's real. We're not making this up. People are talking about that.
I agree. Let's take a quick commercial break. Let's talk a little bit after this about that, the map and the idea behind that, and then we'll carry on. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are in our second segment with Stewart Muir. If you missed us earlier, we have been talking about all things political and pipelines, and I mean right down to Susan Sarandon, who certainly has stirred things up in the Twitter world a little bit as far as Canadians go. So just before the break, we had talked about the map of the Republic of Western Canada, and I think you're 100% right. I think it's come to the point where nobody actually wants to fully do that. I mean, and I don't think they fully understand what it would entail to do that. But at the end of the day, I think you just get so frustrated because we are so different between the eastern and the western part of Canada. And we've got a leader, we do have a leader, but we should have a leader that understands the uniqueness even between the provinces, let alone the nation. But we have a leader that doesn't understand it, doesn't want to understand it,
That's right.
and would rather, fill his media time with us and fluff than actually focus on the problem, actually focus on what needs to happen. So I think you're 100% right, and I think I feel the same way as you. It's a neat idea. It's something that if we don't see some change, I can see that getting some huge traction and going into a federal election. That may be the change that we're going to need to prevent this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern. I've been just simply acknowledging that this talk is out there, but even in doing that, not advocating for it, talking about it, I'm getting people coming to me and saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be advocating for that." I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying people are talking about it. Yeah. Oh no, you're stirring things up by acknowledging it exists. No, I'm not.
No, it exists.
Yeah,
and you know what? It's Facebook, and when something is put on Facebook, as we talked earlier, it does not matter if there's validity behind it. It doesn't matter if it's truth. It is shared. It is embraced.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason that fake news has become so easy to infiltrate Canada. Yeah. And you know what? I find it more in the last couple of years. You know what? Since probably Harper went out, Trudeau came in. Big push, big amount of money being spent to try to carry that same message of slowing Canada down, capping our growth, capping our resources, and people need to fight that. People need to fight what's happening and stop sharing that garbage on Facebook.
Yeah, in all of human history, I'm a historian originally by training, then I went into storytelling. I think there's a common thread in all civilizations, at all times, all languages, all people, when they have governments. Governments collect taxes. That's the thing they all do. Yeah. And in order to collect taxes, they need to have people willing to pay taxes, or they have to have the ability to force people to pay taxes. And our system today, it's a little bit of both. But it's always nice if you can have people willing to pay their taxes. And I think right now, people are feeling frustrated. We saw a couple of years ago when small businesses in Canada felt very much under attack through the proposed changes, which, to Bill Morneau's credit as finance minister for the Liberals, he reeled it back in after the outcry. But it was only when there was this huge outcry of what it meant for small business when they realized, the people will not be willing to pay their taxes if we do it unfairly. We saw it with the HST. Personally, I thought the HST was a great structural tax, an improvement to the system, but it wasn't as well communicated as the Premier and Finance Minister of the day thought. I think they maybe moved too quickly on that. They didn't tell the story of it, so people wanted it. They should have waited longer, but there were reasons for that. But anyways, taxes are ultimately what we're generating for government, so it can deliver services. And right now there's been sort of I think almost a severing of that continuity of thought line on that. We're paying taxes so that the government can redistribute the tax money through the services it delivers to Canadians who have paid those taxes. It's a cycle. And right now I think that cycle, a lot of people are asking, it seems broken. I have people who aren't from this country who are putting small but very strategic and smart investments into disrupting our ability to have that tax cycle that creates benefits for British Columbians and Canadians, and they're being treated by our leaders as if they are important in our dialogue. Oh, you've decided that a conflict at this point of a river is a national affair, and we all should be talking about your issue as if it's a number one issue. When we have poverty, when we have 1,000 other problems in society, these outsiders are saying you have to make this your number one. Yeah. And fine, they can advocate for that, but when our politicians accept it, we truly know that the system is going to be subject to skepticism. And when that happens, people will begin to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't pay my taxes as willingly as I used to. Yeah. And that's the corrosive thing. And it becomes enforcement. We're going to make you pay your taxes even more than we already make you. I mean, yes, you can't hide from the CRA. but as people say, well, maybe I should just retire and go to a nice warm place and read books. because being here is not a productive way to invest my time and treasure.
anymore.
This is corrosive. And Canada, because we are such a true democracy, a Boy Scout or Girl Guide of a nation, we accept other people. We're as honest with others as we are with ourselves, and I think that right now is clearly not producing good outcomes.
It's not, and it's funny because I look at on the municipal stage, so people know that they can get a hold of their mayor and their council because they're going to run into them in the grocery store, they're going to see them in the local coffee shop, or they're going to pick up the phone and phone them, and all of a sudden it becomes this disconnect where if the feds waste $50 million on something that they shouldn't be spending our money on, or $4.5 billion that they shouldn't be spending our money on, it becomes this disconnect of, oh, well, they've done it. And at some point in time, people need to realize that your elected MPs and MLAs and even your non-elected, even the ones that are running government, even though you did not vote for that party, they are still running our government. They're accountable to you. They are accountable to you the same way that your city councilor and your mayor are. So you may not going to run into them in a safe way, but you need to have a voice. You need to be loud. And if it comes to the point where we stop paying taxes. I was looking. There was one in Alberta. There was a company in Alberta that had written this letter to Rachel Notley and Justin Trudeau, and they refused to pay the GST on top of the new carbon tax, on top of the new federal carbon tax, and said, this is not a fair tax. In our system, you cannot tax a tax. It says that right in the Income Tax Act and in the Tax Act. Yet they're still doing it. But these people are starting to stop allowing the system to just flow the way it always flowed. And I think more people need to do that. More people need to go, you know what? No, I'm not doing this. Not because I don't like you, not because I don't believe in what you're doing, because it's not right for Canadians.
Yeah, the little power that voters have at the ballot box is something they, hopefully more people start to appreciate. We've seen a decline in voter engagement and voting.
Unfortunately.
That's bad.
But I think that's
there
a
are
sign
consequences.
People just kind of going, you know what?
They feel as if there's nothing that will make a difference, and the whole system is built on that making a difference. So it's urgently needed that we should restore confidence in that.
But it's politicians, and it's funny. As a politician myself, and being one for a very long time, we call it silly season, where politicians typically don't listen or don't engage until election year. Right, and then it becomes this great big tell us what you want and we're here for you and golden promises and it tricks enough people back into believing it, right? And it's one of these things where don't believe anything they promise you that's going to get done. Get a business plan from them. If you were to sit down and go to your bank and you're going to open up a business, the first thing the bank's going to want to know is not the promises that you're going to make of these better times. It's going to be, how are you going to do it financially? How are you going to do it sustainably? How are you going to do it environmentally? And that's what we need to start demanding from our governments. And we're not. And if it's to stop paying taxes, so be it. You know what I mean? They're going to come after us. Are they going to throw us all in jail? Probably not. Are they going to throw a few of us in jail? Sure, why not? But you know what? I think at the end of the day, Canada needs a revolt. Canada needs to not go to the extreme that we're seeing in France right now, because that's a little bit extreme for Canadians. We'd have to say sorry 3 times. But I think for us to be able to show the government that we're not just going to roll over is what needs to happen now.
Yeah, and I think we see policies like the carbon tax, where the federal government is saying we're going to backstop this. If you don't do it in a way to our satisfaction, we're just going to put in our solution. That's what's going to happen for some of these provinces, the ones that are going to court, Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and that I think that's not political good news for the Trudeau government to go into an election year where there's this fight happening. I mean, the root problem that carbon taxes are about is a legitimate problem. I don't know too many people who say, oh, that's not an issue, but it doesn't mean that any solution a federal government proposes is the right solution. And I get the feeling that if one dares to ask a question about carbon tax, to say, well, what about why do you hate the planet so much? How dare you ask about our carbon tax policy? And that's wrong too.
It is. But I think if people understood that you're not going to tax the problem away. we've got a big discussion in Fort St. John right now because we're so close to Alberta, where Grand Prairie is only a 2-hour drive. You go to Grand Prairie, and gas prices in Grand Prairie are substantially less than what they are in BC. And I mean, Fort St. John alone, it takes us, a lot of trucking to get something from Burnaby to here, even if it's coming from the small refinery in Prince George. But then you've got 40 cents of taxes on every liter. And you look at Alberta, and our closest, city to us is Grand Prairie, and their posted prices are about $1.11, right? So you save this, 20 to 30 cents. You get over as far as Ontario, and you're talking 80 cents a liter for gases because you take that 40 cents out of it. And I don't think people understand when carbon tax first came out, and BC was the leader of carbon tax and the first province to say, hey, you know what, we're going to do this. Nobody really questioned it. It was a BC made baby, and they did it. And now we're starting to see it federally, and we're starting to see it increase. And people need to go, okay, wait a minute. So what exactly is this money doing? Where are these funds going? Because the funds aren't going to what they've been promised to go to.
In BC, next year, the third year of the current budget cycle, is projected that there will be, for the first time, $2 billion threshold surpassed for carbon tax revenues to the British Columbia government. That government has told us that they're not interested in cycling the revenue back to residents. Some of the increase, they say, is going to go to low-income people. That sounds like an all right thing. And some of it to innovation, whatever that might consist of. But from all the statements I've seen, it sounds like they're going to get pretty used to having a nice big chunk of change because they've decided that they would pop the balloon on real estate and all of the property transfer tax revenues from that. So that's going to shrink way down in the next couple of budget cycles. So they're going to become way more reliant on the carbon tax. Do you think they're going to give that up in cycling it back to environmental measures that actually might make a difference? Not a chance. Now, with the coming into an election year, we're going to have another weird thing in BC, which is that 10 years ago we were the early adopter of a carbon tax in all of North America. I think we were the first mover on that. 10 years later, it's never really been a huge political issue, but one thing I've noticed is that the feds are going to campaign probably on the carbon tax being good for you because we're going to give you more money than you paid into it. Now, don't get me started on whether that makes sense as a tax measure if that's their philosophy on it, but they're going to start splashing money all over the provinces that have got a new carbon tax. Meanwhile, BC with its 10-year one, are we going to get anything splashing on us? No, there's going to be no benefit. We're going to be watching, this so-called climate leadership that we were supposed to adopt to be global leaders. Where's the reward for that? We're just going to be the one province in Confederation that's not getting any revenues from carbon tax payments flowing back. All the other ones who don't even want it will be getting paid by Ottawa with our money. It just is weird.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I've never been a fan of the carbon tax. I wasn't a fan of the carbon tax when the BC Liberals brought it in, as being the first one in the country or in the continent to do it. I'm not a fan of it in its current state, and I think the carbon tax needs to be scrapped. I like what Jason Kenney in Alberta is doing. I like what Doug Ford in Ontario is doing, and actually breaking down the fact that you can promise to give as much money back as you want. Why even charge it in the first place? But as you said, they've got to make up these missing revenues because from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, and here's the one thing that they should be talking about, the fact that since 2000, the greenhouse gas emissions from production of natural gas in British Columbia have been reduced 50%, not because of carbon tax, but because of problem solvers up here who are on the job. You're tightening this and that, you're adopting this new technology, you're training this, your new capital projects are the best they can be, and that's how you're reducing emissions. That's smart and effective.
The way it should be done.
Yes.
But that's without politicians being involved.
Yes.
I think when you remove the politicians and you remove the bureaucrats, I think that's when you find that things actually work like they're supposed to.
Yep.
Good. Well, that is all the time we've got right now. Stuart, I thank you so much for joining us on the show. Very enlightening. Ladies and gentlemen, get on his Twitter account. Look at the information that's been released or unveiled lately in regards to what we are living in, and check out his comments about Susan Sarandon, because I absolutely love that, and she needs to mind her own business. And until next time, we will see you next week. Thanks again, Stuart.
Thank you.
Thank you.